Hey, greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Relationship Schools podcast. Here, I'm your host, Jason Gaddis, and I'm grateful to be here with you right now. How are you doing out there in the world? A lot has happened, a lot is happening. And again, can we make our primary relationships, whether that's a friendship, a partner, a family member, an ally in our lives as we face the challenges out there? Okay, I think I can't be more clear every single time here that the quality of your life is dictated by the quality of your closest relationships, as the longest study on human behavior ever done suggests, the Harvard study, okay, on adult development. Okay, again, psyched to be here. If you have not applied or heard about our coaching program, I am training relational leaders to be out in the world helping people work out their differences. That can be couples, family members, coworkers, etc. I think this is an incredibly valuable life skill, and our coaching training is filling up. It's amazing how many amazing human beings we have signed up for this training so far. So relationshipschool.com/RCT if you want to find out more. Okay, in this episode, I am completely honored to connect with Dr. Ed Tronick. Right here, I've got his book, if you're watching from YouTube, The Power of Discord. Okay, I just got this today, and I interviewed the guy today. And I got an advanced copy from him so I could plow through it for our interview. I got through most of it. Ed Tronick is the guy famous for creating the still face experiment, which we show in some of our trainings because it's so poignant and so powerful in terms of what happens for us as infants. You know, they used to think one thing about infants that, oh yeah, there's not much going on there, and they don't actually read the adult and respond accordingly. Well, Ed helped us see that that's not the case and that there's a whole exchange going on. So a little bit about Ed. Ed Tronick is a developmental and clinical psychologist. Professor Tronick is a University Distinguished Professor of Psychology at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He's director of the Child Development Unit, a research associate in newborn medicine, a lecturer at Harvard Medical School, an associate professor at the Graduate School of Education, and the School of Public Health at Harvard. He's a member of the Boston Psychoanalytic Society Institute and is a past member of the Boston Process of Change Group and a founder and faculty member of the Touchpoints program. He helped create the Infant Parent Mental Health Postgraduate Certification Program at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He developed the Newborn Behavioral Assessment Scale and the Touchpoints program with T.B. Brazelton, and on and on. And this guy created the still face experiment. I thought I'd provide some quick context of the still face experiment because we didn't contextualize that for you. So some of you are like, what the hell is that? Okay, so he's a developmental psychologist, and he studied infants in the 70s, basically. So this guy's been around and has 40 years of experience here. And he showed that a mother looks at a baby, and this is videotaped, and then they're having a beautiful exchange, and then the mother looks away and then comes back and has kind of a flat affect. And then the baby tries to get the mother's connection back. And it's really heartbreaking to watch this. And we'll include a copy of that in the show notes in case you haven't seen it. A lot of our students have seen it. It's quite fascinating. And, it just goes to show, this is how we were raised. Like if mom or dad was, compromised or not around, we were impacted. Ellen and I have been wanting to interview this guy and connect with him. Ellen had some awesome exchanges with him and over email, and then I got this crazy opportunity to talk to him. So this guy has really changed the way we see infant-parent dynamics, and I think it's really informed Ellen and I in how we do our couples coaches training and how we work with couples in our present-centered couples coaching method. It's very powerful. So Ed Tronick, man, this is just so cool. The sound, I should mention, the sound in the first 30 minutes sucks, all right? I worked with him previous to the interview, and the guy's really busy, and I was like, hey, if I don't get this recorded. I may not get another chance. So we went with it. And then halfway through, I was like, dude, we got to change the audio. Like, can you move around? Like, do something different. And so we played with it, and we figured out something that worked. So 30 minutes, first 30 minutes, the audio isn't great, and then it gets normal after that. So thanks for your patience on that. I figured I'd rather release this than not interview Ed Tronick. Okay, here we go. Let's do it. Okay, welcome to the show, Dr. Ed Tronick.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really an honor to get to speak with you. As I was just saying before we were hit record, my wife's a big fan. We're big fans, and thank you for all you've done for the field here. Ed, I'm chipping away at your new book, The Power of Discord, and I'm loving it. And I noticed, I'm just going to kind of get right into it. Well, actually, let's, just for the listener, in your words, who is Ed Tronick these days? What are you kind of up to in the world?
Mostly Ed Tronick these days is staying in and trying to be as safe as possible. But when I had another life before all this began, I suppose I primarily see myself as a researcher on infants' social emotional development and on parenting. And the work that I've done includes work on the still face paradigm, which probably a lot of your listeners have seen, and they could go on YouTube and see it if they haven't. It's a pretty powerful phenomenon. And growing out of that, I continued to work on social interaction between infants and parents. So I also became interested in infant mental health, where I direct a fellowship program here in Boston in infant parent mental health. And I've done a fair amount of cross-cultural research on infant development and on parenting, and also on on newborn neurobehavior and the kinds of factors that affected everything from prematurity to in utero, cocaine and opioid exposures. But all of it, I suppose all of it has really been focused on the first few years of life and what kind of processes are in place that lead to both normal and or typical and then atypical.
And yeah, it's amazing what you've done. I'm so curious too, your thoughts on, I have so many questions for you, but the thoughts on the impact of children out in the world, seeing everybody in masks too. There's that whole like gosh, this has got to be probably not good for some babies, or children.
Well, it's the perfect segue, because the study that we were talking about was a study of looking at infants' reactions to the mother wearing a mask.
Oh, yeah.
And although I'm not supposed to do this because, well, I better not say why I'm not supposed to do this.
Okay.
But I asked my daughter, who has a 10-month-old, to use her iPhone or her smartphone to videotape Gabe's, the 10-month-old's, my grandson, my fabulous grandson, reaction to her first playing with him, and then what happens when she puts on the mask. Because I figure parents at home can do that.
Totally.
And hopefully we can pretty quickly collect some data on it.
Yeah, I bet there'd be a lot of willing people that would record their Zoom calls or FaceTime calls for you to do that.
Well, maybe people want to do it. Just hearing it now, I'll accept the videos. But she did it wrong, because what she did was she did it as if she was doing a FaceTime call. So Gabe ended up looking a lot at the screen, which is another study to be done, instead of really paying all that much attention to her. So I'm having her do it tomorrow again.
Okay, cool. Wow.
one possibility is what you're suggesting, is that the infants are really reactive to the mass going on. And they might be, but it might be an effect of something like novelty,
Yeah.
or it might be disturbing
Yeah.
to them, not be able to see them out. But if you think about all the ways people look when they come to interact with infants. So people are wearing glasses, sunglasses.
Sure. Yeah.
Men have a beard one day and the next day it's shaved off. Women are wearing, full scarves, or even there are places in the world where Muslim women are wearing full coverings. It seems like babies thrive and do pretty well in different ways. But of course, that's the interesting question. Like, how will they react? What kind of effect?
You're going to find out. Ed, another question about your 40 years kind of in the trenches of the still face experiment and that research. Would you say, I'm just so curious, how has the medical community and pediatricians and have people accepted that this is kind of how it is now, or are people still like, no, this is you're making that up? I mean, obviously when you see it, it's undeniable, but I'm saying in terms of our culture and how we treat children and how we raise children and how we parent and how doctors connect with kids, is anything different? Are we treating this whole thing differently now, thanks to your research?
I think there has been a change. One change that everyone will recognize, I think, is that when we talk about the infant being active, a social participant, social partner, I think that's really become part of the way we think about infants now. But when I first did this research, that wasn't the idea. The idea was, one, babies didn't have very many competencies. Social engagement wasn't something that they were engaged in. They weren't able to read the cues and the back and forth that was going on. That they were very dependent and they were still developing and they didn't have very many competencies. But I think that's changed.
Yeah.
When I'm teaching my undergraduates, even they think of infants as really being very social and participatory. Sure. That's changed. I also think the still faces had a pretty powerful effect within the clinical community. Not only those of us who deal with infant parent mental health, where people talk about the still face and its relationship to things like attachment or quality connection between the parent and the infant. But even in your area, where people are looking at, couples and their interactions and how people are responding to one another.
Oh, it's immensely helpful.
Yeah, and I think a key part of that is that when we were looking at typical face-to-face interactions between parents and their infants, we looked at mothers and we looked at fathers and we looked at strangers. We went in with kind of the assumption that there was this kind of perfect dance between
right.
the parents.
They were always synced up or something.
And everything was wonderful. And it's amazing that we were thinking about that, because we're looking at lots of interactions between mothers and babies. And anybody who's looked knows that, well, the baby gets fussy, the mother looks away, she's doing something else. Now the phone rings, she picks it up. But we still had this idea that mothers and infants were, and parents and infants were in this really tight synchrony. And that interaction is really positive. So it's an example of how scientists like myself and others can bring an assumption and you keep seeing data, observing things, and it's just not true. And somehow you don't see it.
Right. I mean, the core kind of conclusion of your book for me so far has been this point right here, that actually the interaction between mother and child or parent and child is full of what you call mismatches and repairs, right?
The way that came about wasn't that we were looking at the interactions, the videotapes or the pairs that came into our life. But when we did the data, right, this is the value of data, they weren't always matching one another. We were saying, okay, the baby's doing this, what's the mother doing? Well, she's not doing the same thing with something complementary. She's doing something else. Where the baby is looking away, where the baby is playing with a strap, where the baby is playing with a toy, where the baby is just looking around the room. When we started looking at the data, we began to see, there were periods of time where mother and infant were really coordinated. Mutual smiles, mutual gestures. But then there was all this other time where they were mismatching one another. And the model that we came up with was a model of the idea that there's matching, and then pretty soon after that there's a mismatch, and then the mismatch gets repaired back to a match. And then pretty soon there's another mismatch, and then there's another repair. And what we found was about, on average, and it really varied, but on average, about 70% of the time in interactions that look like really good parent-child interactions, 70% of the time they were in mismatches. That's the some were more, some were less, but also that repairs in the typical interactions happened really quickly, so that they get into a mismatch state, and you'd see 4 or 5 back and forth with repairs in a minute or over a couple of minutes. So most of the mismatches got really quickly repaired.
And I noticed you changed the word, you used to speak about it as like a rupture, and now you use the word mismatch. Is there a reason for that?
Well, actually, I don't think I ever particularly used the word rupture. I'll come back to that. My Beatrice Beebe, who is one of my colleagues, talked more about ruptures. The reason I didn't like the idea of ruptures is rupture sounds to me too intense or too severe.
Right.
Big, and most of the things I'm talking about are really small. Like
I look away and
you look away, and then I fuss with something over here, and we come back together. The really typical kinds of engagements.
Yeah.
And I wanted a word that wasn't punitive.
Yeah.
Like, for example, there are, one could think about mismatches as errors, which isn't such a big, it's not a big word. Or you could think of them, sometimes I talk about miscommunication.
Yeah, or misattunement.
Right, or misattunement. But there are interactions where there really are ruptures. So when you look at infants who have been neglected, or infants of mothers who have this pretty severe depression, not just not just those who are a little bit depressed, but pretty severe. You see ruptures where the infant, it's not unlike the still face. The infant makes bids to engage the mother, and the mother doesn't respond, and the infant turns away, and the infant begins to turn away for a long period of time. And the mother is not able to repair, and the infant isn't able to
Yeah.
repair. So there are ruptures.
Yeah, totally. Is it fair to say connection, disconnection, reconnection?
That would be fine
Okay.
as well.
Yeah.
That too would be, that's not raising it to a high level. Like, we're connected, we get disconnected. Zoom goes off, we get disconnected, we come back. But if the web goes down, that's a rupture.
Right.
And, one of the things I wanted to say was that now when I've looked at interactions between adults, you also see the same kind of pattern, right? You see connection, disconnection. You see it in your work, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All the time. But from the infant research, I think what we've learned is that the repair, in a sense, almost more than the synchrony, is the really critical part of the interaction. Because when you have a mismatch, we see it in the facial expressions of the infants or of the mothers, but we also see it in their physiology as we look at heart rate and we look at skin conductance and other things, respiration. When you look at the infant, even with these little breaks, like the mother looking away or the infant looking away, you see a change in physiology and you see, the smile gives way to a more neutral face or even a slightly negative face. And then when they come back together again, it gets positive. And there's that coordination. So I think what repairs are doing developmentally, I think they're a really critical part of development, that a lot of development is shaped by them. So for example, if an infant is interacting with a parent who repairs quickly, they have a mismatch, the mismatches aren't that big, they repair them quickly, that infant learns that that negative or a little bit of stress that comes with the mismatch gets repaired and that get back together again. And over time, they begin to say, oh, we, two of us together, the infant, is learning this. We, the two of us together, can repair our mismatches. I can trust you to work with me to get back in synchrony.
Yeah.
To help me do what I want to do.
I can trust relationships. I can trust myself, even in my experience, because I'm upset and the other person helped me.
That's right. And I think in adult relationships, we have something really similar going on, that if people were to think about, say, their strongest and most intimate relationships, that you have a whole history of matches, mismatches. Maybe some are bigger, some are smaller, but you've managed to repair them. And over time, not only do you have the abilities to work together and to, repair and match up again, but you also come to know that we'll be okay. We may be fighting right now. We may be having trouble, but in fact, we can work this out.
Yeah.
And I think the paradox of it, by the way, is when you know that with a partner, you can get even angrier.
Right. That's true.
You can say, oh, well, I'm really going to let it go because we'll be okay after this. But the really important part of it is that you'll be able to overcome it. And sometimes, there can be ruptures, like you talk about, that take a while to repair, to get over.
Yeah.
But hopefully you have that history of kind of the smaller, more micro processes of reparation that have built up over time.
Yeah, it builds security in the relationship too. I guess parent-child and then adult to adult. Also, like if you and I are in a relationship, Ed, and we have a few disconnections or mismatches, and they go on enough, if you come around each time and work it out with me, we're gonna be a good team, right? We're gonna have security in our partnership. But if you keep turning your back on me and you keep saying I'm overreacting and you keep calling me too emotional, you and I are gonna stay in an insecure dynamic where you're annoyed with me and I'm constantly reaching for you to get reparation, right?
Right. And I'm constantly pushing back.
Yeah.
There's a videotape that I have. I'm interacting with a 6 week old infant, and the infant's in an infant seat. And I want to see how close I can get to this infant. So this is a baby. I don't really know this baby come into the lab. I want to get really in close to this baby who's in this infant seat. And I start going in close to him, a little closer than maybe a typical interactive distance.
Yeah.
And the baby just kind of stares at me, really flat. And then as I move in a little more, the baby looks away. And so I move back to a normal interactive distance. And he comes back and he's looking at me. And then I try it again and he does the same thing, looks away, turns down a little bit, and I back up. So now we're in a dance. We're perfectly contingent with one another, but we're really not getting connected with one another. And then what I do is I move back almost out of interactive, what I think of as interactive distance from the baby. And the baby looks at me and gives me a look, and then he smiles at me. So he's saying something like, "Oh, that's pretty good." I'm sure you've seen some of the work by, Pat Ogden.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It talks about the distance she has with a client or a patient in therapy and how some of them, want her practically across the room.
Totally. Yeah.
But what the baby is doing to me, he pushes me way back. But then he gives me a smile. And when he smiles, he's really saying, okay, it's all right to come close. And then I really not only go in close, but I get up really close to him. He keeps smiling, and then it becomes too close for him. And now again, he looks away, his eyes go off to the side. And while this may be a fantasy, he actually takes his hand and points as if he's saying, why don't you move over there? So you can see how that connection and that misconnection, and in this case, how each partner is trying to, both infant and adult, are trying to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and if you can be present and again, kind of tuned in, I guess is one way to say it. It's pretty intuitive to kind of have those connections with children or babies, but if you're dysregulated and disconnected and not present, you're not going to read any kind of cue, right? And you're going to come in too close, and then you might get offended because the baby's now fussy. It's just amazing how this works. Like if I don't know myself very well, and I know Dan Siegel talks about the hallmark of secure attachment is the parent's ability to have a coherent narrative of their own life, right? Mm-hmm. If I don't know me, it's going to be hard. This baby thing's going to be hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this process of reparation during the first couple of years is really the process that leads to the solidification of the relationship.
Yeah.
In terms of attachment between the infant and the caregiver. But it's also the way I think adult relationships get built upon one another. I mean, there's that first falling in love phase where nobody makes any mistakes and you don't have to repair anything. Yeah. And then you have the first one, I suppose. I mean, you know much more about this than I do. But those repairs allow you to feel safe, to feel secure. And what they also do is, because it's a mismatch and it's a kind of disorganization, they allow you to figure out something new about how to
Totally.
work.
You said that in your book many times. It's like this opportunity to get to know each other, right?
Yes.
Instead of being a problem.
That's a perfect way to put it. And you can say, oh, does this work? Or maybe this will work.
Uh-huh.
And you sort of always, you're kind of ratcheting, like a ratchet wrench. You're doing a little bit of this, and then it doesn't work. And then you come back and you try something again.
Yeah. Hey, folks, there's never been a better time to help other people than right now. And some of you have considered working for yourself and maybe even becoming a relationship coach to help all the folks that are lonely out there, struggling. We have kind of a looming mental health crisis here. And I just want to encourage you to triple down on the skill of helping other people right now. If you want formal training, you can come train with us. Our coaching program starts in the fall. There's no prerequisites. And you can find out more at relationshipschool.com/RCT. Here's what one of our grads, Leonora, had to say.
My name's Leonora, and I'm from Oakland, California. I'm married, and I have a 8-month-old baby. I actually left my job as an environmental scientist, and now I'm coaching. Without doubt, the relationship school is what was the catalyst for me to switch careers and be a stay-at-home mom at the same time. I just kept staying because it brought me so much benefit. I trust myself more. I feel like I'm more connected to my purpose and my authenticity, and I have healthier relationships. My mom, we're way closer now. My husband and I, we're just on the same team now.
Okay, there you have it from Leonora, who's one of our coaches here at the Relationship School. Man, it's been fun to watch Leonora transform. Her son is older now, and she continues her training here. Thanks, Leonora. Again, if you are interested, guys, go to relationshipschool.com/RCT to apply. All right, back to the podcast. You said something a minute ago, Ed, that I want to come back to. Like you said something like in that infancy, in that parent-baby exchange, it sort of solidifies the kind of dynamic, right? Something like that. Is another way of saying this is that I sort of think of it as like a relational blueprint. It gets laid down, right? It's like a template for life. Like how you do relationship in those first 6 months or year, 2 years is going to kind of dictate how you do this intimacy dance. Can you say more about like how would you describe it? Because that's just my words. I'm making this up.
Well, I think that there really are always opportunities throughout development in terms of changing and developing relationships. If you think about the infant has the landscape of the world, a state of consciousness about the world. It's completely different at 6 months than it's going to be at 2 years of age, or at 5 years of age, or at 10 years of age. I mean, this development is, astonishing, and the capacities of the infant change. So it's very unlikely that the quality or what's going on in relationships between the infant and people that the infant is regularly interacting with, just stay the same. A 2-year-old has language. A 6-month-old doesn't have language. A 3-year-old has some reflective processes. So all of that leads to a change in the ongoing relationship. At the same time, while you form a schema, let's say, or representation, as the attachment people do, of who this other person is to whom you're attached. You have this representation, but that representation isn't fixed. One is the infant and the child has other relationships, and the quality of those relationships affects the first one.
Yeah, absolutely.
First relationship affects the other one. And so you're getting a a really dynamic configuration of what relationships should look like. And after all, I think probably most of us have experiences, certainly as adults, but we had it as children as well, that in some ways you're one way with one person, and in some ways you're another way with another person. You know, there's still you, but the relationship has qualities that are different between you and another person because the people you're with are different.
Totally, and those connections are different. They're different stakes, risk factors. Like let me take another step here to just kind of get your take. That makes all sense. I'm hearing what I'm hearing is like it's like a conglomerate of experiences with other people over many years kind of shapes how how you are relationally, right? It's kind of what I heard there. And in the primary relationship, like a marriage or an intimate partner, it seems to awaken the attachment dynamic more than any other relationship. And I guess that's what I'm talking about. Like, it seems to me those first couple of years are pretty critical, but then it's almost like they don't even get awoken until you enter a primary relationship as an adult. And then it's like, oh, I'm back in this dynamic with my mom, and she's looking away and I'm getting activated.
Well, I agree, but I would make it more dynamic a little bit than what you're saying. In some ways, if you think about the attachment model, I think it's a bit narrow when it talks about the qualities of relationship, because its primary focus is on security and safety. And those are really fundamental. If you're in terror all the time, if you feel unsafe, then there's pretty much nothing else you can do.
Yeah.
Until you start to feel safe. Not only be with other people, but engage the world. The world, if you're already frightened, everything around you is frightened. So the attachment relationship that we talk about in the first couple of years is, I think, at least in the model, is too narrowly focused, because you have a relationship, a baby has a relationship with a mother, which has a lot of dimensions to it. How intense it is, how much positive affect, how many repairs they have, how much synchrony, how long can they be in synchrony with one another? What other feelings do they have for one another? How much positive affect?
Yeah.
So there are all these qualities, and to the extent that one relationship, which is typical in our society, is focused on one person, infant and mother, or infant and mother and father, or parents, but really limited, then your repertoire is pretty much focused on that. And during this period of time, a lot of your physiologic processes, like the one Steve Porges talks about, and what Dan Siegel talks about, or Alan Shore, in terms of brain development, those things are starting to take shape. So it's no wonder that those relationships take up, you could think of it as a big amount of space in your relational space.
Yeah.
But later on, you're more distant from them. But you begin to have a relationship with someone where there are echoes in the relationship now that echo back to what you had before. And so they do bring up pieces, parts of it that, infuse the present relationship with pieces of the past. But we also know that people can really overcome really problematic, abusive, neglectful experiences early on in infancy, when all these systems are getting set, and in a good adult relationship, which you could probably say what goes into that, they really overcome that. They they reorganize. And I think what the process of reorganization is that with this other person, when it starts out, at first it brings up the reactions that they had before, the really early learned reaction, but they don't get back from this other person what they got back before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the anxiety of maybe being hit or being left.
Yeah.
I mean, that's typical. This person doesn't leave. You know, they act out, you act out like you did when you're a 5-year-old, and this person sticks with you.
Right.
What that begins to do, I think, is one possibility is it pushes those things to the side in memory, where I think what it also does is it disorganizes them. So they lose some of their coherence. And now you can have this new relationship, a new way of being with this other person, become the kind of organization that's inside of. So Dan Siegel talks about, and the attachment people talk about earned security.
Yep.
You know, a good relationship that overcomes an insecure early attachment. But I think it's much more, it's true.
Yep.
In a sense, the new relationship really changes how you are. But it changes not just that you feel secure or insecure, it changes the way you are with someone, it changes how affectionate you are, it changes, you know, how much pleasure you get from being with the other person, how much empathy you have for the other person.
Yeah.
So there's a range of.
And couldn't you say, though, that earned security gives rise to those things, that they can experience pleasure and joy and whatever connection because they have security now? Or are you saying it differently?
I think I'm saying it a little differently. I think the platform of security is that security is a platform. And if you're feeling secure, then you can do a whole bunch of things. You can be lots of ways.
Yep.
Right? Just like I was saying before, if you're feeling unsafe, there's very little you can do. You can only be defensive and protective.
Yeah.
But when you feel secure with the person, then you can now allow yourself to explore, and like the infant exploring, you can allow yourself to explore the relationship. And I think the process that leads to security is the process of repair.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so on board with that. Yep.
And then knowing that you can repair, or that you have lots of ways to repair, allows you to, you know, try out different ways of being. What happens if I take a chance and I apologize instead of getting angry? What do I get back? What's going to happen to me? You know, if I don't, like in the still face, if we have an argument and I withdraw, right?
Yeah.
You know, you tell me I have to go visit your parents and I don't want to visit my in-laws, right?
Yeah.
You know, that kind of, I don't know if it's a rupture, but it's you know, it's
we
pretty
might get
typical.
some upset there. Yes.
Yeah. So you have that, and your style has always been to withdraw, and then, you know, 2 days later, something happens and you get back together, but you never resolve. What happens if in the moment, because you do feel secure with this person, because you have a history of being able to repair things, you say, you know, why don't we talk about it? Why don't we, you know, I don't really mean to get you upset, but I feel this way. You know, that's a big reach, I would think. And you need to feel secure in doing that. Mm-hmm. But the security is sort of opens up the possibility, but it doesn't determine, in a sense, what you're going to do. Because you do something else. You know, you come over, give the person a hug.
Sure.
You can just apologize. I'm sorry you feel bad, and still not go to visit the individual.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you saying that in a way, repair, I mean, I don't want to be reductionistic here, but repair is maybe the signature hallmark of a good adult relationship or a secure adult relationship. If we repair for each other, that's like the thing.
Well, it is the kind of thing, and it is what I talk about when I talk about parent-child relationships or even adult relationships, that the repair is the really critical part. And most of us focus on those moments of attunement and synchrony. And those are great moments.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think the process, that's like the icing on the cake. You've gotten there, you've gotten to that point of synchrony by figuring out
Right.
how to repair what's going on. So rather than I had this interesting experience. We used to use the metaphor of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, or two people who can really dance.
Dancing, yeah.
And I was showing a videotape about how synchronous it was. And while I was watching it, I had the experience that it no longer seemed authentic to me, what they were doing. And what I felt was, it was just too perfect. No human beings ever could do that, right? And of course, they weren't doing it spontaneously. They had rehearsed it for, who knows how much
Countless
time.
hours, right.
Go in tune. But what a typical relationship looks like when you're dancing, like I dance, is, you get in sync and then you get out of sync and you try not to step on the other partner's toes. And you get back together and you figure out how to get back together, and then you come apart.
Right. That's
and then
life.
You back together. It feels great when you get back together. And as soon as you get back together and notice it, of course, you get out of sync.
Make a mistake again, right? Yeah.
So repairs are fulfilling some intentions and goals that you have in the relationship. But remember, you could be doing a tango and stepping on toes, or you could be doing, some rock and roll dance or some other kind of dance, or a waltz. So those dances are really different. But the repair process and mismatches in them are pretty much the way we all dance. But some of us do waltzes,
Yep.
and that comes out of our temperaments and our individual goals and what we want to have happening in relationships. It's not like we all want to do the waltz or do the tango, and none of us. And even when dancers are dancing the same dance, they do it differently.
Yep.
And they recover differently.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. It's a great metaphor too. And you're right. I mean, what you're kind of speaking to is there's a fantasy, it seems like, is my language, that we get into around we're supposed to be like those couple dancing all the time. Like if it's a good relationship, it's one where we're in sync all the time. And I think this is why your book and your work is so powerful, because you're saying, no, that's a fantasy. You're going to be frustrated if you keep expecting that. And instead, let's be humans, having a human experience, which is it's going to be connection, disconnection, reconnection, or mismatch, repair, like throughout the day or throughout the week. And this is normal. It's okay.
Yeah, and that's where, that's the word, that's what we mean to capture with the word discord. Discord allows for a reparation, and out of discord, out of the disorganization, maybe you figure out a new dance step. You sort of screwed up on this one and you're mismatching and there's discord between you. And then you find another way to come back together.
Yeah.
So the reverse is what I experienced in looking at Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, is that they're dancing together. It's just laid out. It doesn't change. And in a sense, while obviously creating their dance was an enormously creative process, they're no longer creating it.
Right. They've rehearsed it so many times it's automatic almost.
That's right. And what happens in relationships is, I think in really good relationships, there is discord. And that discord allows you to try something else. Mm-hmm. I expect that, this isn't my area, but I expect in relationships that are having a problem, usually it's negative, but the negativity is perfectly worked out. It's highly contingent. One does one thing, one does the other thing, one does one thing, one does the other thing. And I see that with parents who are unable to really coordinate with their infant. It looks negative, and so we say, oh, it's disorganized. In fact, it's not disorganized. It's almost, the baby reaches for something, the mother moves his hand away. The baby fusses, the mother turns away, comes back, and they do it, repeatedly. The repetition of, of psychopathology. So they have a perfect dance, but it's all in the negative domain. And
mm-hmm.
What I try to do with parents and infants where I'm seeing that is I try to do something that gets them disorganized, that breaks up this ongoing pattern. And that can be asking the mother to really slow down how she's with the infant. Not because the infant needs her to be slower, but if she changes that, then the infant has to make some kind of adjustment. And they begin to unravel.
Oh, interesting.
And I think, with couples who are really having problems, they're very much locked in. It feels disorganized and it feels problematic. But in fact, it's highly restricted and structured.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes I'll work with a couple that's in a negative feedback loop, like you're saying. It's just and it's very kind of organized in its negativity. Mm-hmm. I might have one of them do something completely different, like, hold on, time out, now try this instead, and just to disrupt the system, right?
Right.
And then they have to now organize around this new thing, and hopefully it's an organization that starts to move towards like a repair or a getting to know you process.
Yeah, and when you get them to do something else, they have a different experience. Part of the problem with that, I do a lot of framing things in terms of dynamic systems theory.
Yeah.
Part of the problem with that is even if you have a really negative pattern of interaction, you're a couple. One of the things that does for you is it gives you, it's not very satisfying, but it gives you a real coherence. You know what the world is like.
Right.
But when you, the therapist, say, gee, instead of, leaning forward and screaming, or whatever you ask them to do, why don't you move back and just take a deep breath? What you're asking them to do is to disorganize this coherence. Mm-hmm. That alone can be frightening. Having, we say change is a stressful process. Well, it's a stressful process because what you had organized is now coming apart. And in coming apart, you feel the stress of the loss of your own coherence. Mm-hmm. So what sometimes we end up calling about resistance of someone wanting to change, they're not resistant because of whatever the dynamic, whatever's going on between the parent and the infant, or maybe in the couple. They're resistant because it's frightening to them to think, well, I'm going to lose all this.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to lose what I know over here.
Right. Yeah. Who wants to do that?
Right. Nobody. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This is really cool. Subtle stuff. And I'm again, just so fascinated with the parent-child-infant dynamic where you're discovering all of this, right? And then we can apply that to adults.
Yeah.
Go ahead, and then I got another question for you.
And I have to say, it's a little like the still face experiment. The still face is, you're interacting, then you have this big mismatch, and then you repair it and interact again. And that sort of has become kind of in a way, the model for what goes on in normal or typical interactions. But I have to say, what's amazed me about the still face is, here's this little experiment that I did for a particular reason to test, some fabulous hypothesis, right? I did this little experiment. But in the years since then, people have figured out all sorts of things about it. And it's really the community, I think, of clinicians and researchers who have seen implications that really I never thought of. When I was doing the still face, we never paid attention to the third episode where the repair is taking place. And yet now that's a really critical episode to look at. But the way people use it, in clinical work, there are clinicians who show it to couples, show it to individuals as a way of giving them a sense of, the power of emotional disconnection.
Yeah.
It makes me feel wonderful, but it's pretty remarkable. And I would love to take credit for all that's been done with it, but it's not mine. It's become a thing unto itself.
Yeah, I appreciate your generosity there, and you had the download, the insight, the inspiration to try it. Right, that's where it starts, and the ripple, I think, is huge. We even in one of our courses, we just have people be talking, and the other person just looks away or looks at their phone, and it's just a really enriching experience for everybody to go, oh my gosh, this is so activating for me. Because we've all been on the receiving end as adults of someone distracted and how bad that feels.
Two thoughts. One was we did an experiment with adults where we had one adult say you play the role of the mother and the other play the role of the baby. You didn't have to act like a mother. You didn't have to act like a baby. Just sort of think that that's what you're doing with one another.
Yeah.
And then we explained this in front of the two individuals. You're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and then we are going to ask you, the mother, to roll and stop doing it. And we just want to see how you feel about it. And then they do that. And afterward, we have them do like an emotion checklist. And the person who's played the mother is saying, I felt guilty, I felt bad, I wanted to stop. It seemed like everything was getting disorganized. And the person who played the baby is saying, I'm getting frantic and I'm getting angry, but I'm getting panicky and I'm really anxious about what's going on. And the little anecdote, so we have data showing that. So it really affects them, even though cognitively.
Right, they know, but this is an experiment.
What's going on. But something deep inside of them is being affected. And the anecdote about it is the mothers who say to the quote unquote infant, they're back to being whatever they are.
Yeah.
Said, well, I didn't fault. He made me do it. But the other person already knows that, right? But
Right. They're trying to get rid of the guilt that they now feel for doing this experiment and hurting someone's feelings.
And I don't know if you saw this little bit of a news clip today, or maybe it was yesterday. There's a reporter, I think, in the tunnel in the Senate or wherever they go. And Mitch McConnell is going by, and another senator, and 3 or 4 senators going. And the reporter calls each of them by name, like Senator McConnell, what did you think about what President Trump did at the church? And McConnell just keeps going. And the next senator just keeps going. And the next one just keeps going. No response, nothing back. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, this is, politics aside, this is like doing the still face. You're reaching out to me and I make no attempt at connecting.
Yeah.
Of course, it means these guys never repair anything. They just,
totally.
They just onto themselves. And
desensitized, right?
It really brought it to mind for myself.
Yeah.
And it's the difference here in Boston. We had a demonstration last night, and in front of the police headquarters, police had put up, metal fencing or little barriers, nothing threatening. And the crowd was there, and some of the officers, or actually the whole phalanx, went down on one knee when the protesters were asking them to go down on one knee, and then the protesters did. And there was just this moment, it was like electric, like the space between them was filled with, something coming together.
Yeah.
And that's what a repair is.
Right.
Repair, as opposed to, oh, you're the protester, I'm going to push back on you. That's like me with that 6-week-old baby getting in, coming in
too close.
And of course, what does he do? He, backs off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's playing out everywhere, right? Yeah. Oh, man. Couple more questions here, Ed, and then I'll let you go. I just want to honor your time here. You okay with a couple more?
Yeah, sure.
Co-regulation, you write about this in the book, and I think you have this, I'm going to just read this quote here, and you say, there's a quote that says, in other words, the infant's behavior and the mother's behavior are intimately intertwined. In this process of co-regulation, the baby's mood affects the mother, and the mother's mood affects the baby. In the experiment, the crying mother heard was not that of her own baby, but we can imagine that hearing her own baby's cry would be significantly more stressful. When there are problematic patterns of interaction that we seek to change, we need to look at the relationship. When the interaction shifts from one of mutual regulation to mutual dysregulation, the problem is no more the fault of the parent than it is the fault of the child. Will you just speak to this a little bit? Because some people start to worry here that this is like codependency. Like, I'm unhappy if baby's unhappy. There's some truth to that, and that like us parents, especially, like if our kids suffering, like we're in pain, right? We'll talk about like maybe the important and necessary function of this.
Right. Well, what you're quoting is this experimental paradigm, which we just recently developed, and in fact, it was just published, so I'm not going to perish for a while yet. Where we have mothers interacting with their infant, then we play with the infant, and the mother hears either infant cries, not the cries of her own infant. And some of these are really weird cries because they're from infants who had neurologic problems. So they're really strange cries. One of them is called the cri de chat. It's a very high pitch cry, and people who've sometimes heard cats cry sometimes think it's an infant.
Okay.
Cry.
Wow.
Anyway, they're listening to that, or they're listening to positive gurgly sounds
Okay.
by babies. And then, so they play with the infant, they hear the cries or the positive sound, and then they play with the infant again. And what happens is that the infants of mothers who heard the cries get upset and drop out of the new play situation, the reunion play situation, at a very high rate. About 2/3 drop out, as opposed to the infants whose mothers heard the positive vocalizations, who maybe 10% of them drop out. So the babies are picking up on some change in the mother.
Yeah. Below kind of like this meta conscious awareness kind of thing.
It's below, they're not into meta consciousness yet. And when we look at the tapes, we find it very hard to distinguish whether the mother heard the cries or she heard the positive vocalization. But the infants are really good at picking it up
on it.
One difference that we do find, and I don't know if this is the key one, is that the mother's vocalizations who heard the cries are higher pitched and have less prosody, less of that playfulness in their voice than the mothers who were who heard the positive vocals. So that may be the information, the signal that the infant is getting. And so what's happening in that situation, but I think it happens all the time, and it happens with infants and it happens with adults, is that the behaviors carry information about people's intentionality, and they carry information about the emotion that a person is experiencing. And we're always responding to it. The infants are responding to it. They don't have a whole bunch of cortical and higher cognitive processes.
Yeah.
They're just taking in the information. Steve Porges talks about these mechanisms of neuroception.
I was just going to ask, this sounds like neuroception, right?
Yeah. And, his emphasis in a lot of his work is on the neuroception of danger. But he also talks about the neuroception
of safety,
positive moods and emotions. And so for the infant is, if there's such a word, a neuroception receptor. They're into these big cognitive processes.
Right.
So they're picking up on this information. And even as adults, we still have all these processes going on. We have layers of other stuff as well, right? Much higher cognitive processes. But at our core are these systems that are reading emotions, reading positive emotions, reading danger and the like.
Yeah.
That are influencing us, and they're not in awareness. How many times must you hear someone say, well, I feel threatened. And they say, the person says, well, what am I doing that's threatening? And they say, well, I just, I feel it. And that other person really is angry and really is threatened.
Yeah, deep down, yeah. Right? Well, it's like when my wife, some interaction will happen, we have a mismatch, and we're not even maybe looking at each other, and I feel it over here, right?
Yeah. Right.
And I'm not even seeing her, I'm not looking at her, but I can feel it in my body that I'm like, oh, we're now disconnected, right?
And what you asked before about early relationships affecting later on.
Yeah.
When you were 10 months old, I'll say it for myself. When I was 10 months old, and my mother was engaged with me and then moved away, I had the same feeling.
Totally.
Right? Yeah. I had it at 10 months.
Absolutely.
Now, hopefully as an adult, I interpret it differently. I know what's going on. But when you're an infant, all you have is the feeling of something's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm anxious, right? You don't say, oh, my mother is behaving like she's mismatching
Right.
me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pay any attention to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Cool. Wow. Gosh, there's more here, but I think we'll stop there just for time. Ed, I really, really appreciate it. Two more questions. One is just where can people find you in the book, The Power of Discord? So I'll ask that here in a second. But I always ask my listeners one question, which is one of our missions here at the Relationship School is to reach 1 million teens and young adults with relationship education so they can work out their differences, right? And if I were to speak to 1,000 high schoolers, let's say, and I had their full attention, and you could whisper something in my ear about relationships, what would you want me to share with them?
Well, for the book, if you're asking where can people get it,
Oh, let's come back to that in a second.
okay. What would I say to teenagers? I've avoided dealing with teenagers my entire life. That's how I deal with infants. And I'll say for the record that, you know, my daughter was just a great teenager to have around. I think I would say to them, well, maybe I think I would say two things to them. One is that they don't have to be perfect, and that they have to give up the idea that they have to be, that their parents think they have to be. Because they know they're not perfect. And in fact, the parents know that they're not perfect. And if you can just get that little shift, then all of a sudden, all those imperfect things that the teenager is doing and all that the parents are reacting to, and all the imperfect things that the parent is doing that the teenager is reacting to, just might settle down a little bit. But I wouldn't make it all go away.
Yeah.
Because good things come out of it. You know, most of us survived it.
That's right. Yeah, cool. Thanks. Okay, Ed, and where can people find you and the book, The Power of Discord?
Well, they can find me I'm at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. You can find me online there, or, you know, this new word, you can Google me.
Yep. Ed Tronick, yep.
Right. And, or, you know, maybe they want to look at the still face, and they can get that online as well. The book, which feels wonderful to have out, you know, it just came out yesterday.
Yeah.
People can find it. It's out in bookstores, and it's out on all the, I guess we can't go to bookstores very much. We can't here.
Yeah.
But it is online, and people can get it there. And if people want to get in contact with me, they can, again, at the university, they can find my email. I'm happy to talk to them.
Cool. Thanks. We'll include those kind of links and stuff in the show notes. That'd be great.
Okay.
Amazing. Thanks, Ed, for all that you do and just your groundbreaking work for us, and the ripple effect that it's done for us.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it a lot.
Okay, Dr. Ed Tronick. The Power of Discord is his new book. Go get that on Amazon. Go check him out at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And it's really cool that we got to do this. Okay, your action step today, other than checking out Ed and that still face experiment video in our show notes, is to get real and get honest about what he's calling mismatches and repair. So in his book, he wrote 70% of the time there's mismatches. It doesn't mean we're disconnected 70% of the time, but there's these places where we're not totally attuned to each other. That's a lot of time, guys. Yeah. So let's get out of the fantasy that we're supposed to stay connected to our partner all the time, all right? I know I like and prefer feeling connected to my wife, myself, and other people. And the truth is, there's, those little mismatches, as he's calling them, all the time. in my relationship. And the work, as he said, they're often just micro little adjustments. But the bigger ones, let's call them fights or disagreements, those happen, absolutely. And your job is to repair and see repair as an opportunity to get to know yourself and this other person. Like, we have to keep getting out of the mentality that conflict is bad, disconnection is bad. It's actually part of attachment. It's part of bonding. It's part of connection. Okay, you can't have connection without disconnection. So think of connection, disconnection, reconnection. Okay, I'll be sharing more about that in our classes here for you students. Great. Yeah, and again, if you want to learn how to help couples, for example, do this, you got to first do our individual training. Unless you've been a therapist for 20 years, then feel free to reach out to me. It's a possibility you could enter our couples coaches training. But most people are going to go through our individual coaches training, which is called RCT, Relationship Coach Training. So go to relationshipschool.com/RCT if you want to apply. All right. This is for you guys if you're looking for a career shift, a pivot, something that's more aligned, where there's more meaning, there's more heart in it for you. And it's going to be an unbelievable journey with the people we have so far. So come hang with us. All right. Talk soon. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships. And you are one of them. So thank you.